let you kind of take a second and introduce yourself, and then we can kind of go from there.
Perfect. Hey guys, I'm John Lambrecht. I'm with ERA Wilder out here in South Carolina. We have been doing buyer's agency forever. I've been licensed here since 2014, and I have never worked with a client that I did not already have a buyer's agency with.
Oh yeah, when we leave, yes.
Oh. Yeah, let me mute. So hold on, I'm going to mute those folks. So okay, cool. Okay, so
right.
2014, you're 10 years into this, and for 10 years you've been kind of doing buyer reps and things like that.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's very interesting. When this news first started coming down the pipeline, and everyone was, sky was falling, sky is falling. I'm like, I don't understand. I've been doing this already. I have no problem having this conversation. And I guess I didn't realize that other states weren't already doing this as a matter of course. And so that was a very interesting reflection for me as well.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, John and I were just texting yesterday, and one of his texts was, hey, like, what's happening? Are we in panic mode? Are we, so, and I don't, I'll be honest, I see Dan on the call. He's one of our managers in Cincy. So, I don't think we're not in panic mode, but it's definitely, it's definitely new. It's something that we, have to adjust to in general, because we are in Ohio, Kentucky, a little bit in Indiana, but also Florida. And so, for the most part, those states have not, sort of used the buyer rep in sort of consistently as like you're saying you have, John. And obviously we've heard from other agents in other states that have been using it. So.
And Wayne, if I could just jump in here,
Sure.
From somebody that meets a lot of other agents from other brokerages and recruits, I can say this, that we're not panicking because we're getting out ahead of this, and ERA has been out ahead of this as we knew this was coming. I'm having lunch with agents from other brokerages that their brokerage isn't even discussing it, or they're not going into detail. They're not going over new forum training, anything like that. So that's where I really believe that ERA, everything from corporate down to real solutions, has gotten out in front of this, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible. And that's why we're offering training after training, just to make sure every one of our agents is educated, knows what their value proposition is. So it's going to be much easier to sign that buyer agency.
Yeah, exactly. We've done our broker Jeremy has gone to personally gone to each one of our regions and had has done sessions, and we're talking about the why and the how can we do it in the forms and everything. So I agree, Dan. It's been great, and of course ERA coming down from ERA as well. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And one of the things that I want to say is that we need to, and this is what I do a lot, I rely on the documents, right? The documents are provided by the attorneys, they're provided by the people that are going to be able to protect us. And so anytime somebody has a question, oh, why am I doing this? Or why do I have to do it that way? I said, well, it's the law, right? It's the law in South Carolina that I have to show you an agency disclosure at our very first substantive meeting. We have to have that conversation about client relationships, about customer relationships. And this buyer's agency is really just another piece of that particular conversation. And so when we're having these conversations, and maybe if we're having a little bit of trepidation about having that conversation, hey, listen, guys, I'm just trying to make sure that you are protected as my client. This is what I do for my clients, and this is the law that I am now going to be explaining to you.
Perfect. Yeah. So I just have a couple kind of questions, and then I kind of want to get into because it is new to a huge chunk of us. Like we've learned over the last month a lot over the last month about hey, we need this form and this is why we need it. But I do want to kind of get into, because it's new to us, how you walk in, how you have that conversation, John. You've been doing it for 10 years. That's one piece that I kind of want to get into, because that's probably where we're gonna I don't want to say stumble, but actually having that conversation with that customer and maybe a few objections that you've seen or probably have seen years ago. But so August 17th essentially didn't mean much to you, John, right? I mean, you've been doing this, so it was just kind of like, okay, now I absolutely have to. It would maybe be the only difference.
Yeah, and we've got different forms now. And I won't lie, I mean, there are sellers now and consumers of media who aren't quite sure what's going on, and folks that are, real estate agents in this area who aren't having the right conversations with their sellers. And so not much has changed as far as my conversation, but the tone has changed a bit, right? I mean, it has to have. We are definitely fielding more questions from buyers, more questions from sellers about why this is happening and how we get there. But the conversation remains the same. And so I think the real key here is going to be to remain calm, make sure that you are explaining your value, and just be authentic, right? Be that person of resource that your client needs, right? Regardless of whether or not they're a seller or a buyer. And let's be really clear that the resource to the seller side on having the conversation about why they should be providing compensation to a buyer is sometimes as important as having that conversation with the buyer about why you should be paid for your services as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that. So one other question before my two that sort of lead up to the conversation. So you've been doing this, I assume Wilder has been doing this. Has your market, your MLS been doing this, or is it half the agents that have been using the buyer rep for years and half not?
I can't speak for every single agent, but I would say about 95% of us have been using a buyer's agency. If they're not in a buyer's agency, then they're considered a customer. That gets got a little funky, and so a lot of people didn't want customers, right? They wanted to be able to represent people as clients. So yeah, we have been, as by and large, doing it with a buyer's agency.
Okay, great. I love that. So, and just to kind of, and I know that like every single market's going to be different, but just in general, what's the percentage of sellers in your market that are just still offering compensation?
Yeah, we haven't seen it plummet here like in some other places. I follow a lot of the social media groups, and for better or worse on some of them. But I would say it's probably still about 95% of sellers are still going to offer that compensation. Whether or not that's going to change and trickle down. I mean, again, this ruling just came into effect as of August 17th, and maybe people weren't having a conversation, and so that number may change. But prior to this, I mean, we had, I would say, about 99% of sellers were offering that compensation.
Okay, cool. And then in your world, what is the percentage of buyer rep agreements you sign that you say, hey, we're gonna negotiate the seller paying my commission versus, hey, flat out, you're gonna owe me 3% or whatever, where it's really on the buyer when you sign that. Just kind of curious, or maybe how many of, what's your percentage of, hey, buyers, we're going to sign this, you owe me 3%, period.
Well, that number is 100%. Honestly, when I'm signing this buyer's agency, because I'm having this conversation with every single buyer that's out there, and the conversation goes like this: hey, most of the time the seller is going to offer this compensation, right? Most of the time. I can't talk for every single situation that we're going to get into. We're going to maybe get into some FISBOs, and those are a different conversation altogether. But you realize that we're having this conversation now about the delta between what a seller is going to offer and what you're going to be able to pay. And that is where we start the conversation. Now, we have to be very careful because, again, we don't know anymore at all what that compensation is going to be. And so the conversation has definitely shifted, right? Because we used to be able to just look it up in the MLS and say, well, you want to see 123 Main Street. 123 Main Street is offering 2.5 bananas. And, I want to know if you'll come up with that extra half a banana. but we're having that conversation with every single buyer that 3% is that mark that I am reaching for.
Okay, cool. So we kind of sort of started this, but and I don't know if it's different depending on, you know, maybe if you know the buyer versus you know, an internet lead type. What's your, you know, especially now, like this is where we are. Like I can't, you know, even if I've been doing this, you know, off and on, you know, for 3 months, but now, you know, now I need to. And you know, maybe I don't know this person, but you know, let's kind of go with we don't know him. What's that? What's your conversation with them? How are we? You know, obviously we've talked a lot about value propping and you know, hey, we're going to try to get the seller to do this, but you know, we talk a lot about, man, some of these buyers, you know, have just enough money for a down payment, or you know, they borrowed some for it, and then for us to come in and say, well, you know, my fee is 3%, you know, so that conversation, you know, so and we'll kind of go a little bit further maybe with some objection handling, but just initially, you know, what's your talk track to soothe them and you know, get them to sign and not be like scared to death, I guess.
So the very first thing is that we're going to try to do this, and I want to tell you, it doesn't work 1,000% of the time, but we're going to try to initiate a buyer's consultation. Okay, and it can be really difficult when you are first starting out as an agent, just in general, because the phone rings and you just want to jump out there. You just want to get in that car and go. Let's go. We didn't even ask them a question about pre-qualification. We have no idea who they are, if they have any money. We have no idea if they even want to really purchase a home or if they just want to take a home tour. And so we want to be very, very careful at all times about presenting ourselves as that professional, right? And so I don't just run out and jump into the car for any single person, right? I'm asking qualifying questions right up front with the first conversation, and we're going to have a consultation, right? Now, if that consultation is happening at the house when I meet them there, maybe we could do that, right? I've got a buyer's agency agreement with me, but we are setting ourselves up as a professional that says, this is how my business operates. My business operates that we do not just randomly show you homes because, Mr. Buyer, I want to make sure that I am doing the best possible job that I can for you. And I can't do that without having an idea of where you're at. You can't do this without having an idea of where I'm at as a business, because we are going to be working together to get to your goals. And so
connect
the
my
very
AirPods to this thing here. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry.
So yeah, we're gonna try to initiate that buyer's consultation, and that conversation goes just a little bit like this. Hey, Mr. Zillow buyer, I appreciate that you want to see 123 Main Street. I really want to show that to you. Let's have a really quick conversation about your goals, about where you're at. You know, do you have an extra 30 minutes before this showing? You know, that we can go ahead and meet up. If we're meeting in my office, that's great. I usually prefer to do that. If we were meeting at the house, let's meet there just a little bit earlier so we can have this conversation. Maybe we'll have a bit of an abridged conversation if we're meeting at that house. Typically, my buyer's consult takes about an hour, and it seems like a lot of time, but this is going to be this buyer's biggest investment that they're going to make. This is the most money that they're ever going to spend. Wouldn't you want to spend just a little bit of time making sure that you're doing it right? So yeah, that's basically, you know, we're going to just have that conversation that says, come into my office. We're going to need to make sure that you are where you need to be, right? And then we want to make sure, of course, that we're going to be a good team together, because we're going to have to do a lot. It's not just about me opening this door for you. It's about me guiding you towards this home.
Hey, John, quick question for you. Are you having your clients sign the document? Is it a 1-pager? Is it a 2-pager? Is it a 16-pager? We've really combed through a lot of different MLSs, boards, states, and it seems to be all over the place. You know, obviously ERA corporate sent out ones for us to use from anywhere as well. So just curious what your forms are looking like, and has there been any pushback from clients based off of longer forms, you know, 3-4 pagers compared to 1-pagers?
So our contract is a 4-page buyer's agency contract. It's been the same 4-page buyer's agency contract since I've been here in 2014, and it is the state form, right? And so it was created by the state attorneys in conjunction with South Carolina Association of Realtors. I do not get any pushback from the longer form of it, and in fact, it's a really good form because it talks about all of the responsibilities that we have to a buyer. It talks about all the responsibilities that a buyer has to us. Because in as much as we are going to be working for that client is also going to be making an agreement with us. So we're going to be a team here, right? We're gonna form a partnership for the terms of this engagement. And again, because it's such a big investment, I think people really need to hone in on that. That says, don't you think that if you're going to be spending $400,000, it's worth half an hour of your time, regardless of how long the forms are, right? But the nice thing about those buyer's agency forms here, and probably in most of the country, regardless of what size they are, is that hopefully they're really outlining the responsibilities of both parties. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean that consultation, and when we were having the consultation, maybe one of the things I do, and you know, again, everyone's going to do their own thing, right? And they have to be able to feel authentic, and they have to be able to really connect to their clients in a meaningful way. Otherwise, none of it's going to make a difference. One of the things that I'll do is I'll send them out my digital business card, right? Their very first attempt of contact. And I'll say, here's my digital business card. Go ahead, click on that link. That brings them to testimonials from me. That brings them to reviews. That brings them to everything they could want to know about me, right? Because I've spent the last 10 years collecting reviews, either from Zillow or from Google or from wherever. And I want them to have a little bit of an idea of who I am, right? That link has a link to my bio. It has a link to my webpage. It has a link to, you know, signing in for my CRM. And so we've kind of broached that particular like roadblock right off the beginning, right? Like, hey, this is who I am. Other people really like working with me. This is why, right? And I don't go too hard on that, and I hope that they will, you know, they'll take that for what it is. But that does help me out quite often.
Perfect. All right. So we have a couple questions. In the first one, maybe you can, you know, at least in your market, because we're still trying to figure this out, but how do you find out the co-broke commissions? So we know that, you know, anywhere, you know, we have a spot in Moxie, so that, you know, we are going to, you know, say, hey, this is our, you know, buyer rep, compensation. But right now in none of our markets do we know what anyone else is going to do. So just in your, you know, in what you experience, how do you know what a seller is going to offer, you know, for just any property? And maybe it's different throughout, but I'm guessing you guys sort of have it down now. What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be different throughout the country in different markets. But I mean, the best thing that we can do, and really the only thing that any of us has, is our ability to communicate. Okay. So how am I going to find that out? I'm going to call the agent. Hey, agent, I really like this house on 123 Banana Street. You know, I'm a realtor at so and so. Can you please tell me how much your seller is offering as a co-broke? And certain places are doing things differently now as well, right? I know a lot of people saw the EXP model that was being rolled out. And my office specifically is no longer offering a co-broke compensation. We're not even doing co-broker. That fee is coming directly from the seller. We're having conversations with sellers that say, you know what, here's what this real estate lawsuit was about. And, you know, there was a lot of confusion about who was getting paid what. And so actually what's going to happen now is you, Mr. Seller, are going to be signing that compensation directly with that buyer, that buyer's agent rather. Right. And so that takes a little bit of the mystery out of it. But yeah, picking up the phone, right? It's hard because I know there are going to be agents out there that don't answer their phone. And that can be really frustrating, right? But we're going to try everything we can. We're going to text them, we're going to call them, we're going to email them. And quite honestly, if they're not answering that phone, we're going to start calling some brokers. right? We're gonna go up the chain as far as we can. I don't want us to spend a million hours doing it, but it's important to know because that buyer needs to know how much exactly they're getting into. And it's important for them to know that before they fall in love with that home. And so we're going to have a conversation with the agents. And I know it might be a little bit different. We're a little bit of a smaller town out here. And, there's about 500 of us, 600 agents, something like that. I happen to know quite a few of them, probably at least 80% of them. And so I know enough of them in a way that I can just say, hey, it's John. What do you got going on? Tell me about this one. What's your seller offering? And so I think we need to really rely on our own communication and not be scared to ask those questions of those other agencies.
Perfect. I like that. I think that's a default anyway. I mean, I gotta reach out likely and check on seeing it, see if it's available, set up an appointment, just add in the mix. Hey, what's the buyer rep compensation with it, directly with the agent. So I like that. So I have two more questions. So, and this is kind of one that I was, sort of referring to about, hey, how do we get these signed? Amber's just asking, that, and I'll just throw out the Zillow buyer that reaches out to us that probably, I guess before August 17th, probably went and maybe saw a house with someone else yesterday. So, and I know we always should have done a better job in not just hopping in the car and going, but that one buyer that is kind of used to, first of all, used to just seeing, a property once a week or whatever with an agent, but also like, them buyers, committing to me. So I know we need to, I know the value props there. I know we're going to talk about how you can represent them, but is there just anything different with that type versus a buyer that we probably might feel is more ready, I guess?
I think we owe it to ourselves to be respectful of our own time and our own business. And if you've got these people that are just looky-loos, I want to just see one thing, I don't want to sign anything, I don't want to have anything to do with that particular part of it. Is that really your client? Right? Is that really your client? Is that really the client that you want to be working with? I think we have to have those hard-hitting conversations with ourselves as well. And in the same way, when I was brand new, I would just get in the car and I would go out to, I'd drive 100 miles to show a $40,000 manufactured home, and I would just do that for everybody. I didn't have as much knowledge. I didn't have as much respect for my own business at that point. And so again, it's going to be up to every single one of you to decide how to run your business. But for those people who are just saying, hey, I just want to see a property with no strings attached. Great. You can't do that with me. It doesn't matter because they're going to go to the next one and they're not going to be able to deal with that next one either. This is literally the law of the land at this time. And so we just have to be comfortable with explaining why we're doing that and how that buyer is being protected by us doing that for them and how that seller is going to be able to negotiate with that compensation. And I think if we lead off and say, Mr. Buyer, you're going to end up owing me 3% versus saying, hey, we're going to have very nuanced conversations about this throughout the entirety of our transaction, but we need to just have one conversation first right now and involves buyer's agency. I think that when you respect yourself as a business, you are going to show other people how they should react to you.
Yeah, exactly. So an advantage, if there is one, if maybe you're struggling with this, or you would struggle with that conversation, or you'd be maybe is, well, guess what, the next agent has to ask it too. So this person's going to get the same objection or form put in front of them with the next agent or the next agent, so it might, in our world where we're new to this, maybe it'll take a month for these buyers to realize, like, oh, that's what that means. I'm not going to find an agent that
Yeah, I think they're going
just
to
show
have to
me a
just
property.
I think they're just going to have to hear no a bunch of times, right? And I think we're going to have to just be very careful. And we're ERA, right? So we have been trained. We have the know-how. We know what our value is, and we know that we have to ask these questions. And I think that if that buyer does go out and they end up going out with somebody who does not want them to sign a buyer's agency, and that person has now broken the law, maybe. I mean, are we gonna be able to do anything about that? Absolutely not. But can we be respectful of our profession and our time and to say, listen, I work with only with clients, right? I don't work with customers. I work with people who I know I am going to be able to give the entirety of my, we call old car, right? The entirety of my fiduciary responsibility to, and you deserve that. And we just need to have a conversation about it.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
that was pretty much what I was kind of trying to ask, but it's more so like retraining the public psyche to, I mean, in the last 4 years, everything in our society in general is just so instant gratification. And it's like, hey, I just want to pop through and see this. I'm not really looking. I can't tell you how many people I've had reach out. Hey, I'm not really looking, but dude, if I could get this house, I would definitely consider selling and buying. And so it's just kind of, I'm just curious how people are getting over that hump of those like instant gratification people, because it feels quite wrong to show up to a showing, meeting a client or potential client for the first time and saying, hey, here, sign this before we walk in. It just feels
Yeah.
so different for those of us who haven't been like forced to do this. The buyer agreement, I know a lot of people do them around here. Most don't in the Ohio area. So just curious how people kind of get over that hump, or how you deal with those people that just reach out via a friend or family member, and just say, hey, I got your name. Can you pop me through whatever property?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I think, again, I'm just going to rely on this is my business. This is how I run my business. When you go to a doctor's office, you don't tell them how you want that appointment to go, right? They're going to tell you exactly what you need to do. They're going to take your copayment before you even get through the door. I mean, there's going to be this whole set of things and rules that we have to follow. And I think the more that we start treating ourselves as that profession that is making sure that we are giving every client the right tools, then every client is going to see us as a used car salesman or a tour guide, that we can just go ahead and do that, right? But that's going to be more about you taking control of your business and less about that buyer.
Yeah, and Desiree just made a great point. Is you can make it property specific, so it's like, hey, we're signing this for this one house, and so that's a great idea to to get them in the door, being legal. Though, two
Oh,
things.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
two
You can make
things
it
like,
time.
well, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say 100%. You could make it by a period of time. So hey, we can do this for 24 hours, and then we tear up this contract. We can do it very much by, hey, we're gonna see 123 Main Street. We're gonna see 1234 Main Street, and it's just gonna be those two properties, and that's where it's gonna be our buyer's agency. You have the ability on your forms, and again, I don't know what each of your individual forms look like, but you have the ability to you have the ability to dictate exactly what the terms are going to be. And so if they're very worried about, man, I don't know about you just yet. And I said, well, do you know about this house, 123 Main Street? You want to see 123 Main Street? This is what I need for you to sign in order to see 123 Main Street today. And that's okay, right? This is not an offer for a sale. We're not even going into anything deeper than our relationship together. And once we get there, we're going to have all of those other conversations about, well, okay, now how much is it going to cost me? How much are you pre-qualify for? What's the real situation? But again, in order for you to see 123 Main Street, this is what I need from you. Like, you're approaching this as a business, right? We have to start doing that more and more.
Exactly. Well, I'm guessing that there are going to be some audits, something coming. So the one thing we don't want is our agents to be the one that says, well, you know what, I'm just going to sneak in. Like, that just, cannot happen. So if they're refusing, then we just say, well, here, call, or we don't give them a name, but just say, like, well, you're gonna, I can't help you. You're gonna have to, you're gonna have to call someone else, and sort of, valuing your time. Like, goodness, if I can't get them to sign it, and it's at worst case, this one property, we can say, hey, look, if the seller doesn't offer us anything, you don't have to pay. You know, I mean, you can break it down to where they're just signing their name and we're going through one house, but if they're not willing to do that, then, you know, we have to move on. You know, we can't get him in the door. That's for darn sure. So,
Yeah.
and then just curious, and you guys are probably, you know, on it, but maybe you still see it. How many times, one thing that I'm worried about, I've actually seen it where I sell already, is a buyer signs an agreement, you know, and it's not a one property. Let's say it's 6 months. There's a time frame on it. And then all of a sudden the buyer's seeing a house with another agent. Like, you know, again, sort of what, you know, we've talked about is educating the public. You know, they're you know, if we don't have that conversation that says, hey, like, this means I'm the only one that can show you a house. But in the case of, hey, I got an agreement, and then all of a sudden I mean, the deal in my market is they signed an agreement 6 months or a year or something with an agent, and then went and looked at another property with an agent and actually put an offer in with the second agent. So now the first agent's like, hey, you're under contract with me, you know. So do you see that? Or did you see that, you know, at a time when this was kind of taken off for you guys, in maybe how you've dealt with it?
I mean, it certainly does happen, and no matter how many discussions we have with buyers, no matter how many times we say, "Hey, I'm your agent. If you see a for sale by owner sign out there, you're going to call me. Or I'm going to be your guy." I also am going to have to say, like, I'd have to admit my own shortcomings on that. Where did I fail? What did I not do that I needed to do to follow up that person? But again, that's its own thing. I mean, this is a legally binding document, right? And here, just even on my own buyer's exclusive right to buy buyer agency contract, item 4, buyer's duty, buyer agrees to A, work exclusively with broker and his associated licensees during the term of this agreement. And so that's to view any properties, to preview any properties, allowing me to identify properties for them. Now, if you have not had that conversation with that buyer, and that buyer just thinks, oh, I can just go ahead and call up any old mom and pop shop, once they've already signed this contract for you, then number one, you probably didn't explain it enough. Number two, you probably didn't develop the type of rapport that you really needed with that one. You didn't give them enough of value. Because there's a reason that they went somewhere else and talked to somebody else, right? How many times can you say, oh, I was just at an open house and I put an offer in. You're like, oh, congratulations, but we're under contract here. I mean, technically it is a legally binding contract. And so, at that point, we want to just have conversations with those other agents that say, hey, listen, this was a buyer that I was working exclusively with. I'm still under terms of that contract. And then we have to make those decisions for ourselves about whether or not that means, do I ask that agent for a referral then? Maybe that client wasn't mine as much as I thought they were. Or do I really stick to my guns and try to make this difficult for that buyer? And one of the agreements that we make when we're doing real estate is the code of ethics is that commission cannot stand in the way of a purchaser, right? And so we have to be really careful we're not stepping on our own toes as far as the code of ethics is involved.
Yeah, I love that. It's time to stand up for us, to show our value. It's not time to, like, sort of tiptoe around this agreement. I mean, like you said, they need to know, whatever the time frame is, whatever the commission is, they need to know every detail. They need to know that, like you said, they call you and only you, and this is what happens if you don't. I mean, we need to be blunt and nice in obviously, but just in general, they need to know everything, and not us, being a little afraid to throw it out there because, it's like, man, this is new to us. So, but I do love that. So, couple questions. So because, again, I keep saying this, we're new. Do you have, just as an option with, that buyer that, is struggling with the down payment, in maybe they are going to come up with 1% or 3% or whatever number, to cover. Are you guys seeing that potentially that banks are have an option to to help cover or are you guys maybe adding that into a higher sales price? what are maybe some options that you've seen with buyers that would or do owe us money, and we know that they're struggling a little bit with getting everything
Yeah.
together.
So that's not a new conversation for me as well. And almost in the same way that we used to approach VA buyers, right? And you want to be very careful. This is very much property specific, but if you, and it really also depends on which market you're in, right? So it doesn't maybe have the same power in markets that are multi-million dollar properties everywhere, right? Because that small percentage point is going to be a lot higher than in, let's say, my market, where the average sales price is 323,000, right? And so when I'm asking you for a half a percentage point off of 300,000, we're not asking you for that much, right? I'm asking you for, $2,500, something like that. It's not so exorbitant that you can't do that. But often, it is just about negotiating, right? It's about maybe putting that into the terms of the contract, putting that into the terms of the offer. If you're showing a house that you think is worth, and again, I'm going to use the numbers that we use around here. If you're selling a house that is listed at 265,000, and you know that maybe your buyer doesn't have quite enough, you're going to try to put an offer into 270,000, ask that seller for $5,000 worth of concessions and closing costs. And so that is its own, that's its own beast. And you're going to have to really work on that specific to each home and each property that you're viewing. I wish there was a blanket statement for that, but there really isn't, right? And sometimes we have to just allow ourselves the thought that, man, if this buyer really can't afford to do this, then this buyer really just can't afford to do this, and maybe it's not the best time for them to purchase a home. And I hate to be blunt about that, but sometimes that just is the case. Do we want to help every single person? Absolutely. However, can we help every single person, right? Is every single person ever going to be available to buy a home exactly when they think they are? They're not. It has happened with every one of you, I'm sure, where you were working with somebody and you were like, oh, we're good. We even got a pre-qualification, and then you get down the chain, and actually this person could never afford to purchase a home. But we didn't know that because we didn't ask the right questions.
Yeah, great. So so this one's interesting, and it kind of leads my mind in a couple directions. I'm kind of wondering maybe why, but Ben is in our Columbus market, and he says, are you seeing listing agents asking to see the buyer agreement when presenting an offer? It's happening in Columbus. Obviously, this is unethical and against the rules. But I mean,
Yeah.
have you seen that? Again, you've been doing this a while, so maybe it's filtered out, but do you kind of remember seeing that, or does it happen?
So prior to this wasn't even part of the conversation. That agreement that I have with that buyer, that's my agreement. That's my brokerage's agreement with that buyer. That is literally none of the seller's business. It has nothing to do with the seller. And so if the seller is asking you to see that, you can tell them to kick rocks, quite honestly. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the short end of that question, because it literally is an agreement that I have between myself and my client. Now, if you guys want to, Mr. Seller, if you want to send me your compensation agreement and see if that jives with what we've got going on here, by all means, go ahead and do that. But my agreement is with my client.
yeah, I'm wondering, and maybe Ben can add, but I'm wondering if they are, sort of asking, because if my agreement, if I just show it, maybe I don't know any better, like, oh, okay, I'll show it to you, and it says my client's going to pay 3%, and then all of a sudden magically, they haven't told me what they're doing, and now they're not going to offer, and then my buyer does pay, like, there's something there there's something there that the seller's trying to, or the seller's agent is trying to maneuver, I'm guessing. But yeah, sir, I love that. I love you sort of, and there's other folks that have said, geez, totally illegal, or not illegal, just unethical. And you have no obligation whatsoever to show them something between.
Yeah. I mean, try asking that same agent if you could see their listing agreement. What's going to happen then?
Yeah.
Is it going to show you that? I don't think so. And so again, if this is a point of contention with the seller, ask them to provide a compensation agreement then, if that's what they're worried about. So at least you can see where they're coming in at, right? Tell me, again, we're going to be doing in this office, and I don't know if ERA in general is going to adopt this, but EXP has, that says we're not offering co-broker anymore, right? And so what is this brokerage offering you? Nothing. Now, that really takes a lot of the power out of us, but it also takes a lot of the, because we have this seller really compensate that buyer's agent and says, okay, well, what is your seller's compensation offer to a buyer's agent? Great, takes all of it out of it, right? And let's also remember we still have due diligence periods. We still have times to make these decisions. We still have times to get all of these particular questions answered. And so I want us to not panic about not necessarily having all the information right up front. We could still use due diligence as a way to back out of this contract if we find that those terms aren't favorable.
I love it. I love it.
Can I ask a quick question
Oh, yeah.
about lenders and what they're allowing as far as auctions? I don't know if this is like a lender by lender basis, but I've heard somebody say that lenders will allow up to 2% of our commissions to be like tacked into the loan. Is this
Like
something that you guys have
as a closing.
heard, or that you've, yeah, like as
Yeah.
part of the closing costs, I guess? Is that something you've experienced? Is that like how does,
Yeah,
because I mean,
we've done it
honestly, renters
before.
are stuck between a rock and a hard place where, I mean, you said it before, it's like if you're not in a place that you can buy, then don't expect to buy. But a lot of these people don't have down payments because over the last 3 years, their landlords have, inflated their rents by 300%, that there's no way for them to get out of that rental rut. So it seems really wrong that we wouldn't be able to, figure out the compensation bit of it. So just curious if you've experienced any kind of working with lenders as far as,
Yeah,
your compensation
I
is.
want to be careful again about any time that we have this conversation, because I believe that is going to be very specific to your lender conversation. And I think all of us throughout the country are going to need to become very much better friends with our lending partners, and we're going to need to start taking those coffee dates again, right? We're going to need to start doing those, hey, do you want to meet for lunch meetings again? Because again, those institutions are going to be sometimes what keeps somebody from purchasing or not purchasing. And those questions specific to what one bank will allow and what private lending institution will allow are going to be very much germane to that particular company, right? There's not a one size fits all question for that. Now, again, there are always tactics and things you can do. Are we going to raise the price of a house a bit? Are we going to, are we going to ask for a concession on buy downs? Whatever it happens to be, we just want to be very careful that we're not using a blanket approach for that. And we're having very specific conversations with those lenders, which is why when I have a buyer and I've signed the consultation and we've gotten through all of the different pieces and parts, I'm calling that lender, right? Hey, lender, tell me what's going on with this client. Tell me what's up. Like if I go out there today and I show them this $400,000 house, number one, can they actually afford this $400,000 house? Number two, am I going to need to be asking for closing costs? Because at this point, if that buyer, and you've really counseled them and they're actually ready and they're not just a window shopper, if they've done the necessary parts, they've met with that lender, they've had those conversations, and the lender should have a good idea about what they need to do moving forward. And so we're going to want to make sure we're having those specific conversations with those. And again, I want to be careful because again, not every buyer is a buyer for right now. And I hate it, right? I do. I'm a landlord myself. I understand, I know there's things that, will prohibit buyers from purchasing. And I want to, if in the perfect world, I would love for every single person to be able to afford a home. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so we have to just be very, very careful on a specific case by case basis, especially when we're talking about the interactions between lenders.
Yeah, I think it's important that we don't, that we're not out there just saying, oh, the seller's going to cover it, or, oh, the lender will do it, because, even if it happens one time, the lender covered it on this deal, whatever, however that worked out, we can't just be like, oh, just, again, I just keep thinking about, an agent just like, what's the easiest way I can get this signed? Like instead of like maybe having a, even not a hard conversation, but having the truth conversation and maybe a hard objection or two, instead of having those like, oh, we'll get the seller to do it, and then they're like, oh, okay, and whatever they end up signing. So, we just got to make sure that we're well aware and it's not anything at this point. Nothing is blanket, case by case and buyer by buyer type for sure. So.
And
And
something's
maybe
only going to be
even,
worth, sorry.
sorry, I was just gonna say, maybe even encouraging our buyers when we do have the buyer consults, I usually give them a big list of questions to ask their lenders, and maybe I, should just add that question. Hey, if it comes to it, how much of our agent's commission are we allowed to roll into our closing costs?
Yeah. I would just become best friends with your lenders.
Yes, and for the record, our partners are well aware of this. So First Nat in Ohio and in Neo in Florida. So call up Scott, call up the folks in Ohio. So have that conversation, or whoever they have. But I think the more honest we are, the more open we are. Confidence in ourselves to be, to actually, not just say, hey, this is why I'm valuable, but to actually show it and show them the value. And I clearly think we're going to have, I don't know, a month, 2 months, 3 months, I don't know, of a period where we're going to see things that annoy us, or in Ben's case, have an agent do something silly like that. Sellers may or may not start not offering compensation. Maybe we'll be at the roughly 95% that John sees after doing this for 10 years. But I guess we'll see. But I do like the conversation here. Does anyone, I think, John, whether you have anything, but anyone else have any? I love the chat, I love the interaction, but anyone have any questions, comments, anything they want to bring up? Awesome. John, anything else you want to add, or?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
All right, this is Brian Beckman. I'm in Wisconsin, but soon to be in Florida full time. So anyway, in Wisconsin, they have a pre-showing document. This is something in lieu of a buyer's agency agreement. Do other states have that? And I don't. I'm not directing my agents here to use that document. I'm not saying they can't, but I don't think that gets us anywhere. And again, it doesn't show our value if we're willing to sign that one. But do other states have? And if so, how and when do they use it?
Brian, here's what I'll say about that. We looked at something very similar, like the one that was coming out through Zillow, where Zillow was like, hey, we've got this one buyer little showing form, right? I absolutely hate it. I don't like it at all. I think it's useless. I think what it does is it sets us up into a number one, it sets us up into a customer relationship and not a client relationship. Remember, again, I said I only work with clients. But number two, it sets us up as tour guides, right? And we know that we are so much more than just tour guides. We know that we have way more value than just going somewhere and opening a door. And so for me in my office, I will not use that. Now, are there other agencies that are using that? Yeah, of course, and go for it, right? Like, again, there's no one size fits all. If you think that that is what you're going to have to do it, right? Because really the main intention here is that we are doing a giant CYA, number one, to make sure that you get paid, but number two, to make sure that you are not in violation of any of the terms of this particular lawsuit. And so, anytime that there's another piece added onto it, we are just always going to be cognizant of the fact that there's a reason that we're doing this, and really it's because we don't want to get sued, and we'd also like to get paid.
Yeah, I don't like it either, but I know people are going to use it here. And so I'm trying to, you're always trying to come up with a reason to say that's not the direction we should go. And here's why. right?
Yeah,
So,
and again, if it works for you, and if that's the only way to get in the door, because at the end of the day, I mean, what is our job? Our job is to make sure that we can provide entrance to homes for clients. And if that's the objective, and that's the only thing that's going to get you in there, by all means, go ahead and use it, right? For me, it's not going to be what I choose to do, but again, that's not going to be what somebody else wants to do. I just don't like to be set up as a tour guide, right? That's just not my job. If I wanted to be a tour guide, there are plenty of tour companies out here, and I could go ahead and show people neighborhoods all day long, but that's not my real job, right? So again, I think it's about making sure that we respect ourselves as a profession.
wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. Great question, Ben. Or Brian, sorry. Yeah, so that's awesome. I love it. Anything else, John? Any last?
Yeah, I've only got a few more minutes here, but here's what I really want to say. And I said it before, the conversation is going to have to be we're focusing on buyers now, but I think that we really are going to have to start focusing on our conversations with sellers, because when these conversations don't have as much of an impact, when that seller is willing to offer compensation. And when that seller is willing to offer compensation, is because we've had that right conversation when we're having a listing about exactly all the things that all of us are talking about right here, about how people have reduced means of down payment, about how it's going to be very hard to get buyers in there if they can't afford to pay their agents, because they're already putting a year's worth of escrow in and interest and paying those bloodsucking attorneys, and now they're going to pay these bloodsucking realtors, and so it's already hard enough. And I think if we're having the right conversations with our sellers throughout the board, we're going to start to see we'll start to see the upswing on the buyer side of it. I know it seems counterintuitive, but I really think that the more important conversation is the conversation that each of us are having with sellers.
I love that. That's great. And that's, I mean, if you and the majority of the agents in your market, that's why you're at a 95%, roughly, or whatever, where sellers are still offering compensation. So, not a hard conversation with the seller, but just, kind of have a one pager, have, part of your listing presentation, practice it, just like any listing presentation, this is just adding to it. If we go in there winging it and then go, well, why should I, and he says, why should I offer? And we're like, well, and wait, if we got bam, 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 right there, they can still decide to or not. But the fact is, we can value prop ourselves in by reasons why to offer compensation can be part of that.
Yep. It's going to be a little harder to get those facts and figures right now because they've taken all the off the MLS. But you used to just be able to say, hey, listen, here's this property. They offered 1.5 bananas. Okay. They have been on the market now for 175 days. Look at this property right next to it. They're offering 3%, and they are on the market for 35 days. Which one do you want to be, right? Do you want me to list this for you? Do you want me to sell it for you? This is what's going to need to happen in order for me to sell it for you. I want to be careful again that we don't fall into the trap of saying, hey, nobody's ever going to come here if you don't offer the compensation. But we want to have the conversation that just says, Mr. Seller, this is your property that we're going to help you sell. And in order for us to do that favorably in the best light, these are some of the things that we're going to have to do. And whatever that percentage looks like for you, whatever your market looks like, that's going to be the conversation you want to have.
Awesome. I love it. Well, John, can't thank you enough. We recorded this, and we have a lot of folks that end up watching it after. So I know we'll have a bunch more folks, and whoever's on it, this will be in the Agent Hub soon. So if you do want to rewatch any part of it, but John, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And
yeah, Wayne, I really appreciate the invitation. Guys, just go out there, be authentic, be yourselves. Do not forget that at the end of the day, you have a job, and that's to protect the public and to make sure that they are happy. And then Wayne, if you want to share my information to any one of these folks, go ahead, do that. And I'm happy to have a conversation with any of you guys at any time.
I love it. Thank you so much, John. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Bye, guys.
Take care.